the politics into the analysis of Brooks and Dion. That is New York Times columnist David Brooks and Washington Post columnist E.J. Dion. Welcome. Mark Shields is away this week. So let's pick up, gentlemen, with where I left off a few minutes ago with Robert Costa of the Washington Post. David, what a week for Donald Trump. I mean, I guess we all thought maybe things were going to slow down, but first there was the comment about the Second Amendment, seen by some as a threat to Hillary Clinton, and then the ISIS comments. How do we interpret how Donald Trump is communicating with everybody?
Well, this isn't a decision he's making, this is a condition he possesses. And we're not used to talking about the psychological mental health of our candidates. And in some things, I think it's not fair to talk about his mental health in terms of how he operates with his kids and his private life. But there's such a thing as public psychology and political psychology. And in public, he obviously displays extreme narcissism, but most of all, he displays a certain manic, hyperactive attention. And so if you graph a Trump sentence, every 8-word burst, he's like associative thinking. And there's a term in psychology called the flights of thought, where one word sets off an association, which sets off an association. And as one psychiatrist said, compare his speeches to Robin Williams' monologues, but without the jokes, but with insults. And so he's not in control of his own attention, I don't believe. And therefore you get these rambling, weird sentences. You get things he patently should not be saying. And then even this, I'm being sarcastic about the sarcasm. I'm obviously being sarcastic. And then maybe a fifth of a second later, he said, but not that much. So he's contradicting himself within 12 words. And that's a condition.
So, EJ, how are we to understand all this? I mean, as people trying to understand this election.
Well, I've been thinking about it that there's the English language and then there's the Trump language. And in the Trump language, words change their meaning day by day depending on his own political needs. I won't go into the learned psychological explanation that David gave, but there are a lot of people now talking that way about him. But politically, he doesn't seem to care much about what he says. He gauges the effect. Sometimes in the middle of a speech, he'll change his direction if the audience doesn't like him. And I had a very instructive trip this week to York, Pennsylvania. It's a conservative county, southern Pennsylvania, not far from here. And one of the most interesting conversations I had was with Allison Cooper, the editor of the York Dispatch. And she talked about how people in this very Republican area, York City is Democratic, but the county is very Republican, are people who care about manners and decorum. And she spoke about what she said is common decency is a core part of who people are. And I think in this campaign, we've talked about soccer moms, we've talked about angry white men, and I think they're starting to develop common decency voters who are just reacting to what Trump says. A Republican county commissioner I talked to up there said that she's been active with veterans, and after what Trump said about the Khan family and what he said about the Purple Heart, he said, I can't vote for him. And so something deep is happening, and it has nothing to do with ideology or even party.
And meanwhile, David, we're trying to understand, we just heard Robert Costa reporting a few minutes ago, leaders in the party are betwixt and between trying to figure out how do they deal with this. He's saying, I'm going to go my own way. They know they're not going to separate from him. But how do we understand the state of his campaign?
Yeah, well, Josh Marshall's talking points memo points out that in today's polling, if you just take the states where Clinton is up by 10 points or more, she's got 270 electoral votes. And so that's 10 points or more. Can we imagine a state where he moves the numbers in Wisconsin by 10 points? That would be a huge unprecedented gain at this stage. And so it's looking very bad for him. And so the Republicans have to figure out what to do. And so a lot of them are writing open letters, but even more are saying things privately. Let's get the RNC to fund the Trump campaign. We just cut them off, and that either drives them crazy and he quits, or else at least we've got money for our own people. And to me, that's sort of, in the last thing, just take away the morality. The morality is you cut off the funding. But just on political grounds, you think, well, if we spend the money on Senate campaigns, at least we can shore those up. But the blunt fact is, if Trump totally collapses and it gets 38, 40, 42% of the vote, then the tsunami is so big it probably sweeps out a lot of the congressional races, no matter what they spend on locally.
Right.
So where to put the money is an interesting question.
And Republicans are in a real catch-22, a lot of their candidates, because they know that if they get too close to Trump, they could lose a lot of voters in the middle, my common decency folks. But if they cut them off too aggressively, the Trump constituency is still a very big part of the Republican base. And if they lose those votes, they're in trouble. And that's why I think you're seeing timidity and uncertainty on the Republican side, because they don't quite know what to do with Trump.
And I would say it was interesting even after the Second Amendment comments and all that, his poll numbers were flat this week. In fact, he narrowed a little. So it's possible we're seeing a floor, and that he can say all sorts of crazy things, but he's not going to get bumped below where he is.
So if the question is, what are the options for Republican leaders? The options are what? Just to wait and watch and see what happens?
I think that the way, partly it depends on individual candidates. There are candidates in states where they know Trump is going to do very badly, and they're already running away from Trump. There are other candidates who are, as I say, worried about this mix of votes they're going to get. I think more and more, you're seeing the Republicans for Clinton is a real deal. The Clinton Republican is kind of the Reagan Democrat of this election at this point. And I think more and more the leadership is going to look at the threat to the Senate. I mean, the Senate is very shaky, their control there, right on the numbers right now, and say, it's not worth propping this guy up. We're going to go and support our candidate.
Meantime, David,